I will get cracking. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sept Business Development Club of 2022. And I can't believe we're almost at the end and it's coming up to Christmas. I shouldn't say that. I was talking to an agency and they were already talking about Christmas content. So it's good to see, but it's quite scary. Anyway, if you don't already know me, I am Paddy Woods. I am the director of Pimento Fuse, which is a new business consultancy. And I'm also the head of marketing new business at Pimento. So welcome to the Sept BD Club. If you haven't been on previous calls, just please use the chat box to ask questions. And as you've seen, we're recording the conversation. So we'll be sharing that later this week. But today's session is all about pitching and how to win more opportunities. Whether that's full-blown pitch process, or actually where the clients want to see what you can do and deliver for them, and that our side of the opportunity. We all know it's an expensive utilization of resource, and according to the AAR, the average win rate is about 25%. And Jeremy just lovingly sent me some insights from America, which is 84% of clients have already made up their mind on who's going to win the pitch before the pitch actually happens. So today is really about exploring how we can improve your win ratio, but also how to get insights so you can be the winner on the pitch. I've got a great, awesome panel with me. We've got Katie Street from Street Agency and co-founder of Tamba. We've got Jeremy, who is founder and business consultant at Hurley Burley, and Owen, he's got too many fingers in too many pies. So I'm going to let them do a quick bio before we start. So Katie, over to you.
Fab, lovely to meet everyone, and super excited to hopefully be able to share some of my insights, which I definitely agree that most people have made up their mind pre the pitch who they're going to choose. So I'm definitely going to help delve into that. Yeah, my name's Katie Street. I run a new business agency. We essentially help agencies on the whole attract and win more new clients. I've worked probably the last nearly all of my adult career, either leading marketing or sales for large scale brands in the FMCG market and or leading sales and marketing for agencies. So I've got quite a few, I guess, stories to tell and a fair bit of knowledge about how to attract and win more new clients. So I hope I'll be able to help some of you guys overcome some challenges you might be facing at the moment.
Brilliant. Jeremy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Jeremy. I run a brand consultancy called Hurley Burley Partners. I started about 3 years ago. Before that, I spent the vast majority of my career in advertising agencies. I worked at WCRS, I worked at Publicis. I spent 18 years at M&C Saatchi as an account handler, as group account director, chief client officer. I ran lots of pitches, local pitches, global pitches, won a lot, lost a lot, loads of war stories, kept on reinventing how to pitch. So we'll try and keep away from too many war stories, but I think hopefully I've got to add a bit of insight from my experience of what not to do and what to do more of as we go through today's call.
Brilliant, thank you. And Owen, just quickly.
Hi everyone, I'm Owen. I have my own consultancy and that's focused on helping SMEs and brands position and package up their offering. I also work for a business called Now Next Y, which is essentially an agency advisory business, working on everything from positioning and packaging and all the way up to M&A. In the past, I've been an agency guy similar to Jeremy, doing kind of integrated work. I guess my slightly unique position is that I've been both creative director, planning director, and managing director. So I've kind of looked at each aspect of the agency machine, and I've done a lot of pitches and run a lot myself as well. And I guess similar what not to do, what to do, and I guess understanding the value of a pitch and how to eke that out.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. So I think we've got an awesome panel. So thank you for joining me. So I'm going to start with Katie. Winning the pitch before the pitch starts. So one of the efforts, you got the brief come through, you're sort of in the process, but how do you really qualify that lead? Because one of the things like a lot of agencies do, they'll accept every pitch and actually go for too much, and they're not able to give the right sort of thoughts, thinking, and actually is it the right opportunity for them? So what sort of advice can you give to help agencies in that process at the start of the process?
Yeah, I think, qualifying the right opportunities right at the start has to be, on the top of your list, and you've got to have a process in order to enable you to do that. So for me, a lot of that usually quite naturally comes down to chemistry, but it's about having an initial call and asking the right questions. Like some of the most basic things that, you know, we work with agencies to do now, and I probably have done throughout my career, it's almost like listing out what are the top 20 questions or the top 10 questions that you need to ask every prospect to qualify whether it's a good fit for you or not. And that can be around timescales, budget. You know, if you're a digital agency, it might be around the technologies, it might be around the process that they've been on to date, it might be around the team that they have and who they've got in-house. So there'll be some really basic questions that need to be asked up front. So for me, that initial qualification call, getting it in as soon as you can, and if a client won't have it and they're having a shutdown RFP process, you know, I've worked on some really big you know, government pitches. One of the agencies that I used to work with was the kind of biggest digital agency, you know, highest performing digital agency on G Cloud, and we used to have a lot of very closed pitches, which we a lot of the time did decide to go for, but we had to be very clear on why we were going for that if there was a closed door. So nowadays I tend to avoid those. I think it's interesting, the stat that you said from AAR, that on average agencies are converting 25%, so 1 in 4, because that used to be on average 1 in 3 and was kind of, you know, always improving. So I think that initial qualification call, asking those core questions and being brave enough to qualify out early can save you a lot of time, I guess, would be my initial piece of advice. And that is from years of experience. And sometimes the ones that I've gone for because I'm trying to be competitive and I want to win it, and I know that it wasn't right for us and we've ended up winning it, they can do you more damage than good. So being really honest and brave about that. And some of that goes back a layer, that you need to have a good pipeline to be brave enough to turn away the opportunities that aren't right and not feel desperate. So there's a whole layer of work that goes pre the qualification bit to make you brave enough to turn away the ones that aren't quite right. But that initial qualification call is so important, I would say.
Brilliant. Owen, with your MD hat on, I think that's a really good sort of overview, Katie, so thank you. But just bringing your thoughts from an MD's perspective, how do you give your teams freedom to do that as well?
Well, I think you've got to start at the end. I think you've got to look at what practical stuff. So when is this? How long have we got? And what do we think the shape of this response needs to be? And with that in mind, you can then start to think about, okay, this is the sort of timelines, this is the sort of people I need to get involved, and against the sort of budgets we think we want to assign to it. So this pitch is worth X amount of cash. How much do you want to put into it? How much is that going to affect my day-to-day business as well? Because I think you've got to be really careful with any pitch that doesn't scupper existing, because it's much easier to generate new from existing than it is new from new. So I think, yeah, MD hat would be, what's the value of the opportunity? Does it feel like we've got a good opportunity to win it? I think, as Katie said, more and more, I certainly experienced that pitch processes were starting with, 10 businesses as opposed to 4, and that's ridiculous. So what's the kind of odds on, if it's a 10-way punt, it's much less likely than a 1 in 4. And if is it worth it? Is it you? Is there a culture fit? Can my team get in, sort of feel like they can work with these people? And then can I align a certain amount of cash with the right heads to make that happen within the timeline? And I think as an MD, you don't want to lead the pitch, really. You need to make sure that you're pulling together a tight team. I think agencies lose pitches very often when there are too many cooks. You can, and there was someone bowls in at the last minute, so they don't like that idea, and suddenly it's a absolute chaos. So making sure there is a clear, delegated, tight leadership team. And I'm a big fan of those teams being multi-skilled. So I don't think it should just be an account person that leads the pitch. I think you're much better off having a triumvirate of probably someone strategic, someone account, and someone creative, which is certainly in the traditional agency sense is not what normally happens. Normally creative is left later in the mix, but I would bring them in earlier. And I would then make sure I'm very clear on how much I'm going to invest in this and force the team to stick to that.
Brilliant. Jeremy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just on the brief itself. I mean, we've all had, brief documents from clients. We have good briefs, bad briefs. Let's go to what the real brief is. Let's go to how much of the real brief is actually written down on paper, and what the context of the brief is. Is it there's a new marketing director who wants to sort of be the new broom and bring his own team in? Is it a statutory review? Is there a massive cultural clash with existing agency? Is it a creative challenge? Is it a strategic challenge? Is it a mix of all those things? Often it's more than one of those things, but understanding what the real brief is one thing. Asking enough questions so you understand what the real brief is, as opposed to, we've made this mistake in agencies I worked at in the past, where you see the client, you're brilliant, we'd love to win that. We'd love to do this great work on that bit of business. And you run away and you do the work, and you haven't spent enough time on working out what will win, because what you want to do and what the client wants to buy may not be the same thing. There's a sort of, you can draw the Venn diagram. There's an intersection point, hopefully, of what you want to do and what the client wants to buy, which will be the sweet spot you need to hit. But often that's not the case. And I often quote this thing that I've often run a pitch. We've produced what we think is a brilliant pitch. We've lost. We've seen the work that's won by another agency. But that's shit. How does that win? We'd never have done that. It's because we perhaps weren't aware enough of what was going to win, what the client wanted to buy. There's a third circle, actually. There's what the client wants to buy, what you want to do, and then what's commercially effective. Because again, that may be separate to what the client wants and what you want. You're ideally trying to ask enough questions to find out what's the sweet spot in the middle. Commercial effectiveness, what the client will buy, what will win, and what you want to do. And no agency wants to produce work that they don't like, but they have to feel it in the gut. But you need to find out what the thing is that you want to do that is matched by what the client wants to buy, because you may have a very different definition of what good is. I've had many situations where what we think is brilliant, the client will think is shit, and what they think is great is not what we think is great. So you need to ask enough questions so you're on the same page, which we always want to do in chemistry sessions, try and find out, what do you admire in the sector? Which advertising do you think is great? So you understand how they think, so you understand what will win. Because if you trust your gut too much, you may find that we're just different people. There's these client people, agency people, we may have different tastes in everything, including what wins pitches.
It's a really good point, and that sort of value of creativity coming through. I remember listening to John Pepiak talking about sort of actually sectors have very similar styles of creative. The phone sector is all the same, car sector is all the same, even down to their website. And actually, it's one of those, are they looking for the same, or how do you break the mold and creativity and stuff like that? And it's something we'll come to later on, but I think it really does show some sort of challenges for clients to how do you think about breaking those molds, and how do you go about, we come to it, Katie, actually, I'm going to bring it to you now, which is, how do we break the pitch process? How do we break that mold on the client, and how do we really go about sort of challenging to make sure that actually you're always first point of call for that client when they think about you?
Yeah, I think this for me is probably one of the most important things in the pitch process. Like we said earlier, most people have made up their mind way before you're in that pitch room. Not always, but I would say majority of the time. So every single interaction that you're having on the days, weeks, and sometimes months up until you're winning that pitch, you are on show. So you have to be showing up as the best version of yourself. You have to be asking the right questions. To me, challenging the brief is the number one thing that will help you convert pitches. And in fact, I think there are stats out there. I think it might be Blair Enns who said this to me, maybe on my podcast. Was it something like 1 in 5? You're increasing your chance of winning by 5 times if you challenge the pitch process. So I know that's not always possible, but sometimes just being really basic. We won a huge piece of digital transformation work with a building company called Mace, which some of you may well have seen, MACE, lovely, colourful brand, all around London usually. And we were up against, I don't know how many agencies at the beginning. I think it was 6 or 7, and they whittled it down to 2 or 3. We were the only agency, because they had a process in their brief, that asked to go and meet them, and asked to go and present our ideas, and asked to meet in person to ask our questions. The other agencies just followed what was in the brief, responded exactly as they wanted to. Now that's a really basic way of breaking the mold, but there's so many things that you can do that can add more value. If you don't believe the brief is right, you've got to be able to qualify that and explain that to the client, and explain why you think your approach will add more value and might give them more. But most of the time, they're up for, having the brief delivered, or you respond to the brief in a slightly different way. I've got so many examples of pitches I've led. Another one was for, the Thames Clippers boats. We won a piece of work with them. Again, we said to them, look, we don't want to just come on the day, you've given us, it's like 10 minutes for your creds, 15 minutes to present your creative, 20 minutes to talk about your process, blah, 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 blah. And we said, no, we'd actually like to come and workshop something with you so that we've got some outputs. What we'll then do after that is we'll package that up, we'll send that to you so that you've actually got something, to take away and do, because it's going to give you so much more value. Even if you don't end up working with us, we're going to answer some problems in the room with you, and we're going to come up with some, creative concepts that are going to be much more valuable than just a paint by a numbers guess with no research that all the other agencies are going to pitch up and do. And we ended up winning it. So if you've got a reason to, I'm not just saying, break the process for the sake of breaking the process, but think about your touch points and, ask the right questions. And if you think there's a better way of approaching the brief, ask the client. Hopefully that also tells you whether they're going to be a good client, right? And that you're going to enjoy working with them, because you're going to start to build a relationship. If they say, no, we absolutely need you to do it like this, they may not actually be a great client anyway, and you might not want to work with them. So it does help you with other qualification points as well. And
Owen, I'm just going to bring this to you actually. Procurement often set the process on bigger pitches and bigger processes, and you've got external consultants, also procurement consultants or businesses doing that, and they often try and stop and prevent you talking to the client directly. Are there any things you can talk about in terms of, from experience or sort of thoughts around how you can break that procurement process as well? Because direct with clients, marketing clients, it's a lot easier to do that. Procurement put in more barriers to prevent that, and they don't want to, they feel that clients, agencies will over communicate or overindulge the marketing team and take the process out of the way.
Yeah, I guess the same rules apply. You're trying to build culture and rapport. You're trying to sort of get them on side as you are with the marketing director or the commissioning client. So I guess from our experience, if you've been through a procurement process to get on the roster, you've generally already got a relationship with that procurement person. Therefore, you have an opportunity to engage with them. I would be taking opportunities to email, to ask, to try and engage, and to try and get to the direct client through them. And if they don't, then what you can do is ask questions of the procurement person and get them to be the conduit for those. What you're doing even in either scenario is building up rapport and building up some sort of sense of relationship in advance. I think certain things, like there's not much you can do if you're going to have to put a deck up on Ariba or something like that, those sort of funny platforms. But yeah, I guess you can you can build relationships with procurement through the same processes. I would also absolutely echo what Katie was saying about challenging the process. Every time a pitch comes in, I would always see, can we get a tissue? Can we get in front of them? Because you'd be crazy not to go and test the ideas, go get an idea of what they're about. And back to what Jeremy was saying, I think, what are they trying to buy? Very often clients are buying cultural fit. They're buying people I can work with. And you've got to make sure that you're demonstrating that from the get-go. And one other thing to add, procurement, I remember working with the procurement group in Compag, which is run by ISBA, and there was 80 procurement sort of leaders on there. And one of the things they always said was they want agencies to give them knowledge and insights about what's next. So when marketing comes to them, they know what's going on, and they can actually have better conversations with marketing. So they're also stuck in the middle and often out of the loop, which sort of really frustrates them, because they actually really want to get involved and engaged, and be the best ones are really sort of driving change forward for their marketing colleagues. I mean, it's a good point. They want to look good. Yeah, it's important that process makes them look good, that it's well managed, and so the more you can do to support them, I guess, and give them insight pieces is a very smart play. Yeah, and David, I'll bring you into a question later on, because actually Jeremy will tell you, he's got a story about to bring creative into the pitch process. So that will come in later. But actually moving on, in terms of the process, Owen, actually I'm going to put Jeremy, one for you. In terms of building the right process, how do you go about making sure that you've got the relationships going, you've broken the pitch process? How do you drive the teams forward?
so from M&C Saatchi days, really making sure that they're honed and focused on what you're trying to do and the timelines. There's so many times as an intermediary where you saw that the agency had been working on the pitch till 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and they look wiped out. And actually, it comes across badly from their perspective. From a client's perspective, you can see they haven't really planned it properly. And the client will look at that and go, well, if they're rushing in the pitch process, that means they're probably going to be rushing and late for delivering to my needs when I need it. So how do you go about building the right process?
Our best ways, our best pitches when we didn't observe usual agency processes, as Owen was saying, one of the big problems is you bring in creative, you bring creative in really late to the process because you haven't really nutted the brief yet, and the creatives have a stupid small amount of time, and they've got busy doing other stuff and existing clients. That's crazy. Our best pitches are when you sort of cut through that. You established a war room somewhere, and you cut through some of that process, and we try to, as you suggested, Owen, have not just a single leader, but you had equal status to strategy, creative, a managing director or senior suit there on equal terms, running it together. That's one thing, and not be a victim to some of those paralyzing agency processes, which say you need a bit of paper here, you need to book a meeting there, you need to get the project manager to arrange that meeting and draw this timing plan up, which is just crazy. Number one, it's really boring. And number two, it doesn't produce anything of value. You're just fulfilling your legacy agency processes, which isn't going to win a pitch. So we try to get to the brief really, really early, get the creatives involved really, really early, and maximize contact with the client as much as you can, and also man mark. So you see, if there's quite a few clients as opposed to one main client running it, find multiple ways of contacting that client. So it's having just the one person's allowed to ask the client questions, which makes it sound like sort of Kafkaesque sort of bureaucracy. You try and make it natural. Clients buy agencies on emotion. It's about cultural fit, as you were saying, Owen. So find ways of maximizing content. Try and step outside the process as much as you can. Often procurement will say, no, sorry, you're breaking the rules. You can't do that. When you want to ask a penetrating question, they'll say, well, we are sharing all agency questions with all agencies, which is obviously a nightmarish thing, because you immediately won't ask anything of any value at all, because you don't want to give the game away. But you need to test the system to see where you can work around a procurement imposed system, so you can maximize content, focus on creativity early, and cut through agency process, so you're not a victim to those languid systems that hold everything back internally.
Brilliant. Kate, do you want to add anything to that?
I've got something to add there, but it's minor, but also incredibly important. So having worked at, similarly at, larger networked agencies, but also smaller independents and larger independents, also making sure that you have your CEO or MD or whoever, that really senior stakeholder within the agency in those kind of touch points throughout the process. I don't know, Freya's in the audience somewhere. Is this something we spoke about recently on the podcast? I think it might have been. But if you haven't got them looped in and you don't have regular touch points, oh my goodness, the amount of times I have had pitches ripped to shreds the day or, the week or a couple of days or the night before you're about to pitch, because they haven't been part of that process. And that is really, maybe not so much for all of you guys, I don't know, most of us, it's maybe smaller independent agencies here, but that can be so damaging. And most people that I have spoken to in the industry who've worked in agencies have come up against this. So I would say, making sure internally the people that need to know why decisions are being made and why you're doing things, the same as the client. It's a journey, and you've got to have a process. You've got to make sure that you're ticking those touch points, because not just externally with the client it can go wrong, it can actually really mess things up internally. And that's happened to me various times. This is from a lesson learned.
Can I just add to that? So that's back to the begin at the end. And so I'm a big fan of milestone mapping, but I'm also a big fan of mapping the presentation quite early, and not necessarily all the answers, but look, we've got a broad idea now of what we think the answer is going to be around, how it's going, and what do we think the shape of this presentation needs to be. And in Jeremy's war room, I would start to map, these are the building blocks of what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be presenting. And therefore you can start to build out your milestones and your tasks. And okay, we know we're going to need to do some digging into this category, right? Off you go, planning. We know we're going to need to start thinking about what works out there, and we need to break that. So let's go and do some category reviews in terms of creative output. Let's get that on the wall. Let's have a look. let's start going talking to some people. Whatever those areas of input need to be, you know they're going to be a building block within the presentation, and you need to start thinking about them early. And also practical stuff. We'll come on to the creative, how you bring it all to life later, but I think you're probably going to need some design time. You're probably going to need someone to start this deck up. You're probably going to need maybe a little bit of a video doing for a manifesto or whatever. These things can be planned in and thought about, as opposed to, oh shit, we've got 24 hours and I've got to suddenly brief design. You get that in a small agency or a big agency, get that booked in, think about it, and then back to the original point, think about what that cost is. Oh, right. Oh, yeah, we're going to visualize everything. Don't bother if it's going to break the bank. Visualize 2 things that are really good, but make sure you've planned that time in advance.
Can I add something else that I think is really important? So just whilst it's in my mind, because it's not necessarily something that we've touched on yet, but kind of feeds into the creative or the strategic creative process, is it's kind of about being extra and showing that you care. So I always think about, how can I really show that I understand this business, I understand this audience, so to the point where we've led pitches, or we've helped clients lead pitches where we're going to visit, so let's just say, I don't know, did a pitch for Crest Nicholson once, and we actually went to various different Crest Nicholson sales sites, went on the journey, looked at how their current digital experience tracked against the physical experience. We actually did that. We recorded us doing it. We took photos. We interviewed their staff. We spoke to them. We kind of, we make an effort. And I think that is so important, making an effort and showing that you have really took the time to understand that brand, not just, if you're doing a pitch for co-op, going to co-op, I would like to say, actually doing some research, some insights, maybe developing some customer interviews, whatever it might be. The pitches where I have done that, we have pretty much, and when I've been on fire at agencies, we've been winning probably more like 65 to 70, 2 and 3 of the things that we were going for. Taking that extra effort gives you so much more strategic insight that's then going to enable you to develop a better and more creative approach that's actually going to work than not doing it. And clients love it because it does show you care. There's also like going into a meeting and going, oh, I like your watch, I've got the same one. That kind, but there's that kind of extra insights and effort really, really goes a long way, and it helps you. It gives you a head start when you actually start working with them as well.
I also think actually it's a really valid point, which is, ask the client if they got factories. So I remember when sort of intermediary for Bacardi, and actually they got their head sommelier, which is one of the Bacardi family, to come in and talk about the drinks, talk about the brand, and really bring it to life to these agencies, so that they had a vested interest, and actually they really enjoyed that experience, because you get to understand their Bacardi family, but actually more about how they operate, how they think, what they're looking for, and what their sommeliers are looking for. I think it's really important, and actually that's one of the things to break the process. Ask to go and see if it's a factory, go in to see them and get access to that. I remember RAF doing a mystery shopping experience for them, and coming back and saying, this is how your staff treated me, and sort of I was almost pushed to the side as it went back in the day, and when they had this stores and shop fronts. But yeah, all that sort of adds to the story, and David's got a great one about the British Rail pitch and what they did to make it show that this is what your customers experience and stuff like that. So I think it's really important about that. And actually, question before we get into the creative side of things, casting is so important. Jeremy, one for you, it's the importance of casting and actually making sure a lot of time agencies put a pitch team in, and actually clients are starting to get sort of wary of that, and they actually want to meet the team that's going to be working the account. How do you go about making sure you build the right account for that client and the account team?
Well, it's doing the research, really finding out who's the decision maker at the client end. Is it a team of people, or is it a single person? Who are they? What are they like? What's the personality like? Do some research, find out where they've worked before, what sort of work they buy, what's their reputation. Do some digging to find out about that person, so you can find out, okay, who's a good match for that individual, and try and reflect the client team in your team, as opposed to just wheeling in your new business team. The worst mistake, obviously, is when you wheel in the chief exec or the chairman or whatever of a bigger agency who comes in there, and it's clear they barely read the brief, but they do a lot of speaking and talking in the meeting. That's very transparent. A client sees through that immediately as a massive downer. So clearly avoid the temptation or try and prevent the most senior agency head coming in there and waxing lyrical about their views on the brief when they haven't really read it. Make sure only cast people who are absolutely working night and day on that brief. Make sure the diversity is important these days, clearly. So make sure that the team looks right, doesn't look like too old school advertising. But also at the same time, avoid tokenism, because people spot that a mile off. Oh, you've done this because you think it looks good. So make sure that you have people of value who contribute to the brief. So try and cut through the diversity thing. So clearly the people are in the room because they know this brief, they want to work on it, and they add real value to it. Ideally from not from one type of person as well. So an eclectic mix of people. Make sure the team work together closely. Don't be too departmentalized. The war room thing is really important. The worst thing is, and it's very transparent to clients, is when it looks like the people in the room haven't really sat together an awful lot. When the creative guy has forgotten the name of the person, the account person who's presenting the below the line, and that happens a lot. Yeah, Jesus Christ, honestly, are you really a team? So make sure you are a team. Sit together and you like each other, because chemistry is critical, not just chemistry with the client, but chemistry within the agency. So avoid any hierarchy, avoid the ego, partly ego, and make sure you work together as a team, adding value, and make sure you're likable. The reason why VCCP win 70% of their pitches, have done for like 5 years, is they demonstrate their creativity. We'll come on to a little bit later, but also they make themselves very likable. They're nice people. They like each other, and the client like them. And clients buy emotionally, as we know. There's one thing is the work. Often clients buy the agency. They haven't bought what the agency presented, but then, as you mentioned earlier, Katie, they like how they work. They like their approach, even if the solution wasn't right. We can work with you. We want to work with you. You couldn't get it quite right, but we'd like to work with you to see how we can find a solution which we all think is brilliant. That's the solution you want. Don't think it has to be a sealed solution in the pitch. That's it, done. Buy or don't buy. It has to be, you're buying people. You're buying people and culture.
I agree more.
Yeah. And also while they're in the room, I've sat on pitches and the MDs literally cut over everyone who's trying to speak from and you're like there going, this is a car crash. Yeah. And telling them afterwards, it was all you lost the pitch because of you, is quite hard. Yeah. But actually they need to hear it, because that's what honest feedback is really hard.
Can I just say, Paddy, honesty is really important.
Yeah.
So I think back to people liking working with people, an agency is just a bunch of people. I think those people have got to be honest. We've always found that we historically did very well if we were honest and said, actually, do you know what, I don't have a man marked AD for you at this point because we haven't won the work yet. But do you know, you can be very, if you're front and center with clients and say, here's who we've got, here's what this is what we'll do if we do win the work, making sure you're clear and you signpost really helps. And across the board, being honest about, well, actually, we're really strong here, but we're a bit weak here, but we'd work with these people to support this area. Always goes down really well. Don't smoke and mirrors it.
Brilliant. And moving on to creativity, I think it's a big one. Owen, because you're the creative guy, was the creative genius. Visualizing the story, bringing creativity, and bringing David's question, which is actually when clients, I've done this as an intermediary, ask just do scamps, I don't want to see the full creative, and the agency, that one was the one that did the full creative and showcased it all. Importance of creativity in, even if it's a media brief, even if it's a performance brief and digital brief, how important is creativity in when you're visualizing the story to clients?
I mean, it's fundamental. I think visualize the story is an interesting choice of language, actually, because your story is the most important thing. I think you need to start with kind of what's the narrative thread that links this together as a presentation, as a pitch. And that narrative thread starts with, well, we're about this, you're about that, and here's how we're going to tackle this problem, and therefore we're doing it differently. So it doesn't need to say you start every pitch with a cliche quote at the beginning from De Bono or somebody, but you at the very least you have a point of view that is woven through that whole presentation, and that manifests itself creatively. It manifests itself in the tone of voice. It manifests itself in how you visualize it. I do think it's really important to visualize nicely at a pitch. I know it sounds really probably a bit, I, as a creative director back in the day, would have gone, oh, God's sake, don't make me visualize the deck. That's really lame. But actually, it's really important, because what you're doing is demonstrating through the whole thing, even whether it's a strategy slide, that narrative point, that difference that you've got in a chart, in the way that you hold the slides together. So I would allow time for design of the presentation. I think then understanding pacing and drumbeat within a presentation is really important. So looking at how you kind of build up a narrative and making sure that if you have a strategic point of view, there's no disconnect then into your creative, that there is a logic. Oh, this is how this is flowing. I can see, look, they've got a really interesting point of view here, and that is handing the baton to a creative idea that's got me really excited. That creative idea, I think, is then, if it's a creative pitch, you don't have to visualize. I think it's interesting you say the agency that did all the visualization, maxed it all up, won it against the agency that did the scam. That might not be the reason that they won. You don't have to necessarily do every visual or you have to pick the right creative manifestation of that idea. What is the way that you're going to best express this thought to the client and get them most excited? So very often that might be a video. It might be, actually, do you know what? I'm just going to press play now that we've done a little strategic build and don't even do anything other than just watch that then. And suddenly a really nicely edited little mood reel gets them really excited. And you don't have to do much else, because they'll do the join the dots for the rest of it, themselves. So I guess creativity is not just the creative bit at the end. Creativity is the whole presentation. That manifests itself in the story, that manifests itself in the presentation of the presentation, and then picking up the right way of delivering that creative story is really important. It could be, for example, if it's a media pitch, you don't just present the touch points. You show that as a day in the life of the consumer experience, and that's a creative way of manifesting that sort of series of touch points that you're choosing, recommending. So it's got creative in it as opposed to being a creative idea.
Yeah. And so, Jeremy, I think actually one of the things Owen really touched on is the importance of story and strategy. I've been hearing some clients are putting less focus on strategy at the moment, it seems, whereas actually it's the sort of fundamentals of any process, anything that you create has to have the strategy behind it. Talking to an agency yesterday, and they actually won the pitch based on actually the strategic side of things. The strategy was so good, it enabled the creative just to flow of it. How do you go about really building that strategy? And if strategy is not part of the process, how do you bring it into the process?
The first thing I say is it's really dangerous to generalize. One thing happens 3 times in a row and you create a rule from it, and then suddenly it doesn't happen. So pitches are won and lost for 1,000 different reasons. Sometimes it's a tough call. How much creative work do you do in the pitch? I completely agree with Owen. You must demonstrate creativity in some form. It could be the flow of the work, how the charts are presented. It could be the work itself, and that's a tough call. Do you want to go for? Do you want to, even though the client hasn't asked for creative work, do you do it anyway? That's a tough call. Sometimes you will make a call and say, we will, because that allows us to show what we're best at, even though it wasn't asked for. And you'll do that sometimes and you will win, and you'll do that sometimes and you will lose. It's one of the toughest calls you have to make. So I wouldn't make any rules around any of this. It's a case of you doing enough research to work out what you think is going to put you ahead of the competition. Knowing who you're pitching against is really critical, because you may know that these agencies always do brilliant creative work. I'm against X and Y. Yeah, are we going to outgun them with our version of a kick-ass mood video? I don't know. So knowing who your competition are, knowing what the client is, well, from your research, what you think is going to win, what they want to buy, working out what you're best at, and then deploying your creativity accordingly. So that's a bit of a loose answer, but I think it's really important. There's no rule around this. It's really dangerous to say, you must do it like this in pitches. There's massive variables across every aspect of this. On the strategy side, look, some clients aren't that interested in strategy and want to buy some work, but maybe the marketing director who's been in a job for 2 years, got 1 more year there, want to have some great creative work to carry in their portfolio to the next job. I want a great campaign. They don't really care that much about strategy. And the next guy you're pitching to will go, you know what, I'm fed up. I'm into the strategic thinking behind it. It's all very well in practice. What's the theory? So some clients will be like that. So again, it'll vary massively. You just got to do your homework and make the call on how much, what's the high point of the pitch? What's the killer chart moment? Is it when you present your killer strategic thinking, your judo throw strategic idea? Or is it when you show your fuck off mood video? Or is it the line? Or is it the new logo? All these things you don't know, but you need to do your research to work out, as you were saying earlier, Owen, plan out your pitch. What are the high points? If I was doing the 1 minute pitch, what 4 charts would be in it? You know, is it the strategic one? Is it the creative one? Perhaps as the client obsesses about process. I've had lots of creative agencies in the past that never deliver on time. You know, maybe your project director will have a major part in your pitch and he will just be the sergeant major saying, I will always deliver on time, on budget. And the client will go, hallelujah, at last. And what's won that pitch is process. You know, you don't know. And this is the research you have to do. Make the calls. If you try and trust your gut too much, it's like pinning a tail on a donkey, you know? You don't know whether your gut is right or wrong. So you've got to do your research. Is it the process? Is it the strategy? Is it the creative? Let's decide how to deploy our resources across this 4-week period. So we outgun the competition who is X, Y, and Z, who are great at this, by doing it this way. You know, so I think it's, you know, don't create rules, do your research.
Can I add to the strategy thing?
Yeah.
You've got to remember, because it's really important to remember that very often these clients are going to have to go and sell the decision they've made to other people inside their business. So, we've decided to award it to X. Great. Okay, we've been through brand planning, and you're going to now sell it to the CFO or top level people. So actually, the strategy is really important because it helps them sell what they've chosen, the decision they've made. It might not be that they are necessarily fully interested and engaged in 10 hours of strategy to get to a creative idea, but as long as you can find a way of making sure that what you're recommending is packageable and resellable by themselves inside the business, that's very important, I think. And also what you've got to remember as well is when you are putting people into the mix and you are putting, whether it's strategy or creative, the client somewhere will be thinking that's time and money. So what they also don't want to do is be thinking that you're overloading any aspect of your pitch presentation with cost and time. So be judicious, again, to Jeremy's point around, well, how much we got, what's going to float their boat, and actually what's going to make us look like a business that is going to work with their business equitably.
That's a really good point, Owen. Thank you. And just bring some more sort of focus around that sort of creativity and actually pitches online and in the room. I'm not sure the mix at the moment, but it seems to be sort of 50% clients still want to be online and don't actually want to be in the room, but some do. And how do you go about sort of dressing the online experience? This is another whole session, but how do we go about dressing the online experience and actually dressing the room as well? Because I've been in the Picardy one, Geometry did a great example of just actually making you feel like you'd walked into a beach. They'd even got sand on the floor and everything in one of their offices. It was a really amazing experience, but actually it's quite hard to get that, especially when clients want to be online. I'm going to talk to Katie because Katie's smiling and nodding as well.
Yeah, do you know, it's so hard. I've done some very creative pitches like that, and in the past probably really focused on, and I think it is really important, you know, certainly back in the day when it was all about they would be doing tours of all the different agencies coming to visit you in their office, in your office, as part of the chemistry, you know, that kind of the journey of the client used to be something that I still do to a certain extent, you know, really used to think about how people were going to be greeted, what kind of food we had on the table, you know, every single step of that journey is really, really important. I do think in today's day and age, being too showy, probably, especially with, you know, the various crises that are going on, you know, putting sand in a room, I don't know, 10 years was probably a really good thing to do. I probably wouldn't really say that's the thing to do now, if I'm honest, my personal belief, because what's the value? It's a lot of waste. I don't know, that it just probably isn't the most valuable thing to do, and that could turn off a lot of people because, you know, the cost of getting it there, and, you know, start to think about the cultural things that are going into that. So I do think there's, you know, the world has changed. Being too showy now isn't right, but still focusing on delivering a really good experience is what's important. And for me, they're kind of, I guess, going back, and I've seen there's been some questions as well, but actually thinking about what's important to that person. I think what you guys were just saying is super important here. It's not just about the business. I think lots of agency founders, MDs, CEOs are really focused on the business problem And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be trying to solve the business problem in your pitch, because usually it is important, but understanding the problems of the core stakeholders and the things that are going to make them look good and that are going to help them do their job more easily are actually more important in all of your marketing comms leading up to the even point of there being an opportunity created, and through the pitch, I would say is probably more important. And thinking about that in your process rather than being too showy, and how you can help people and how you can show up. Some of the best pitches I've seen recently that have been delivered, virtually, and people have been off sick. One of our clients did a really great little video because someone wasn't able to make the pitch, but he pre-record because he was away on holiday or something and couldn't make it, or was at a wedding or whatever, and he did this really fun little video that kind of came up in their deck going, hey, and he's quite comedic anyway, but hey, it's really sorry I can't be there, guys, or I don't know, did something funny, and then look here, and he just sort of kept popping up on the screen. So show personality, show your people, show your culture. I think that is so much more important than a showy offy, we've all worn red because, I don't know, you're the big red bus company or whatever.
I think that's a really good shout. I'm going to bring, before we finish off, I know there's post-pitch, which we haven't touched on, but there's a couple of questions from Rachel, which is the top 3 questions to ask at pitch briefing that will help to uncover the brief behind the brief. I'm going to pass that to Jeremy.
What top 3 questions? Well, I think that will depend. I think it massively depends on the nature of the client, what you've been through. I wouldn't say always ask these questions. It's a case of listening enough. Obviously, people always say it, but don't do enough of it. Listening enough to understand what's the, and what keeps you awake at night. That question, is always an important one. Don't phrase it in that way because it's probably overused. But understanding what's the burning platform here. What's the biggest thing that needs to be solved in order for you, marketing director, to not relax but feel good. For you to, as you mentioned earlier, Owen, for you to pass up the line to your commercial director or boss or its chief executive, whoever, so it's viable, which is going to achieve commercial success. So those sorts of questions are really important. Again, it could be a strategic question, it could be a creative question, it could be a process question. So I think it's a case of do your listening and then make sure your 3 questions are in tune with what you think are the most important elements that are going to win that pitch. The mistake would be to always ship in the same 3, obviously, the same 3 questions for every pitch, because no 2 pitches are ever the same. No, I've done thousands of pitches, they're all wildly different from each other. And we've won or lost these pitches. We've won pitches we thought we were definitely going to lose. And we haven't even got through to the second round on pitches which we thought we did a brilliant job on. So there are no rules around this. Just do your homework, do your research, and make sure you tailor everything specifically to that particular client in question.
Can I add a question you should ask yourselves every time, which is just, why does this pitch exist? Because we've heard the stat of 85% have already made their mind up. There will be a reason why you're pitching because previous agencies fucked up. You're pitching because the client is doing a merry-go-round to just show their leadership. There's some new ideas in the room. If you can get an understanding of why the pitch exists from the starting point, you're on the front foot. Because usually the client has a problem. That's why they're asking for a pitch. So you can then try and work out how to resolve that. And then the questions I would ask as a business: is it real? Back to why does this pitch exist, or is it a phantom job? Is it you? Is it culturally right for us? Is it worth it financially? And is there a good chance of winning it? If it's a 10 agency pitch, I'd walk, unless there's going to be a 2-stage process and you can whittle that down. And actually on the 2-stage process, we didn't mention momentum is really important. So if you do get through, oh wow, look, we've got through from 10 to 5, very often agencies then drop the ball because we've did a really great sort of interim tissue stage presentation and then we couldn't pull it through.
The other thing to add to that as well, I think, Owen, is why you've been brought into the pitch process. What was your reason for being there?
Yeah, great question, absolutely.
Because often there's something that is different. If you're all the same, then there's a problem. But if there's actually you got a differentiator, you're there for a reason. That's quite interesting. You can play on that. There's a great question from Bob, which is about clients that don't share budgets. Owen, I'm going to come to you with this because actually, from an MD's perspective, How do you go about tackling this as the commercial side of things? You don't want to be too cheap, you don't want to be too expensive, but you've got to be realistic.
Well, I mean, there are two parts of that. If the client hasn't shared a budget, then it makes it difficult for you to understand the size of the prize and therefore how to allocate your cost internally. So I think you've got to be smart about that. I think if procurement are running that process, they really ought to be providing you with something. If they don't, then you don't feel obliged to go back with costs in the same way as you might do if the client had provided you with a decent budget, because I think it's completely unrealistic. You can't suddenly say to me, God, you've just told me that it's going to cost £1 million, but my budget's only 250 grand. Well, you didn't tell me how much that budget is. So I think you then have to make a call in terms of upfront setting your stall out, saying, look, we don't know exactly what the size of the prize is. Therefore, what I'm going to do is excite you today. And I might excite you with something that could be, a gold deliverable, but there's a way of cutting this cake if it's more of a bronze deliverable. You upfront, be open and honest, set your stall out. This is how we're going to respond. And then you deliver some creative thinking that has the ability to scale up, scale down, so that they can buy into it depending upon where their budget lands. Because the reason they're probably not giving you a budget is because they don't know, because they're going through brand planning and they're waiting to get an idea to then go to the begging bowl to get given the budget. So you have to show some flexibility, I guess. But I would manage that by setting your personal stall out up front.
I think another way to manage that, it could be you have your strategy and you create a solution. You say, look, this strategy and create a solution could work for a small, medium, big, extra big budget. Okay, it works for everything. And this is what you get with a medium-sized budget of X. It gets you this. If you could invest at X plus Y, then you get this much more and be that much more effective. However, if your budget is so you can sort of hedge your bets a bit by making sure that make sure your idea you present can only work if you spend mega bucks, because that's you're really limiting your chances there. At the same time, make sure your idea is big enough so that if they actually have got a serious budget that you weren't aware of, it is big enough idea to work with a bigger budget. So it's some flex.
But I totally agree. I think the other question around the other side of that is how much time to invest. We haven't really touched upon value of opportunity in terms of the client, and then does this unlock multiple opportunities? Does this unlock a calendar's worth of work? Is there a potential retainer at the end of this? So that discussion around how much to invest, and if they don't give you a budget, you might well think, do you know what, this is a really great chance to get into this massive FMCG portfolio, and I'm going to then go and knock the doors down. So it doesn't really matter. I'm still going to overinvest in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Just the way that I've always tried to get around this when various clients wouldn't, or procurement people wouldn't give you a budget, is just to ask for a range. It's really simple, obvious solution, and I'm sure most of you probably do this already, but so if are you closer to 10 grand or 100 grand, or are you closer to 500 grand or 3 million? Where are you on that scale? I know you don't want to tell me the exact budget, but usually by doing that you get an idea, and you've just got to be brave enough to keep asking the question. And then I totally concur with your answer there, Jeremy, that actually if you can submit a range of costs, that works really well. We usually try to submit 2 or 3 different cost ideas so that they can choose, and more often than not the client picks the middle one. So you can have this, but you won't, the deliverables and what you need, the quality won't be so good. There's this middle one which is pretty good, does most of the things that you want, and will get you there. Or there's this mega version with all smoke, all guns blazing. So that works really well in terms of working out where you should be, and then giving them 3 options to buy from. It takes a bit longer, but it is worth it if you really want it.
Brilliant. That's also recommended by the WOW benchmark as well, which is give range and give sort of different options. It helps clients buy more, buy you in a better way. Conscious there's a couple of other questions, and we've only got a couple of minutes left. So we will take those questions down and we'll come back to you with some responses to that, Jade and Rachel, because there's some good questions. But we could carry on and on. But in terms of final sort of thoughts, Katie, I'm going to start with you and then just go around the room. But what sort of tips, one tip that an agency should do for the pitch process, and then one thing that they should never do?
Oh gosh, okay, one thing you should never do. I have to think about that. I would say my biggest tip, which I said earlier, no one's going to be surprised at this, is to think about how you can show up in a more valuable way and break the process. Always ask, show up that you think is going to be more valuable. So be brave enough to break the process, because you will have a much higher chance of winning if you do so. What you should never do, put sand in your meeting room.
Nowadays.
I don't know. I think don't be too showy, show up real. I think theatre, I'm not saying theatre isn't good. I really actually think it can be, but I think right now in the current climate, it's more about showing up who you are rather than being overly theatrical. So yeah, just being a bit clever about how you approach the theatre side of things.
I'm going to start with Owen next, or go with Owen next.
I suppose pick the right battles. So given all of the things I said earlier, don't pitch for everything, because there's nothing worse than the hamster wheel, and 6 losses in a row kills agency culture, which can actually do a lot of damage. So, you've got to pick the right things and be judicious again in those choices. And then the one thing not to do. I think it's really important that you show confidence in the presentation. So don't feel obliged to throw a million ideas into the mix, or just don't try too hard to do the things that you think are right and believe in them.
Brilliant, thank you, Jeremy.
I'd say we touched on it earlier. The thing always to do, always probe the brief. When clients ask for the wow factor, what does that even mean? What wow factor for one person is very different. So make sure you define the word. There's the words on the page. What's the real brief? Dig into the brief. Probe. Do your intelligence. So always do that, because don't rely on just the paper you get. You need to do lots more work. That's the start of a process, the brief from the client. And then on the never do side, I'd say never think you've got the right answer before you've asked all the questions. So there's the agency arrogance thing, like we know best. Because of that earlier point made, that your definition of best may be wildly different to the client's. So don't think that you can rely on your brilliant 30 years of advertising experience to come up with some scintillating creative campaign, because you haven't asked enough questions to the client to know whether that's likely to win or not. So never rely just on your gut without having sufficient questions of the client to understand what's going to win.
Brilliant. Guys, thank you very much. Katie, Jeremy, Owen, it's been a real pleasure having you on board. I think hopefully a lot of people got a lot out of that, because I thought there was some really interesting insights there. So thank you. We'll be sharing the recording later this week. But actually also, I just want to highlight, we've got the Independent Agencies Conference happening on the 22nd of September. We will all actually be there. So there should be a link coming up in the chat, hopefully very soon. There it is. Do come along, sign up. It's all about sort of people and purpose equals performance. And we've got some great speakers from James Murphy, Suki Thompson, Rankin, Rohit Talwar, who's a futurist. And it's been hosted by Lucretia Millerani, who is ITV journalist and ITV presenter. So do come and join us. It'll be worth coming along. It's a great day. And also you can come and talk and actually ask some more pitch questions if you want. We'll all be there. But thank you very much for your time. The next BD Club is on the 19th of October, and we'll be sharing more information later on. So thank you.